And so we're going to consider 3 lessons from Christ's exaltation as Lord that is described in verses 9 to 11. We're going to outline 3 lessons from Christ's exaltation that lead us to both worship Him and follow His example. To both worship Him and follow His example. First note, we learn from the principle of Christ's exaltation. We learn, point number 1, from the principle of Christ's exaltation. The reality that is explained here, the principle, this may be surprising, and we need to be careful how we apply the proper motivation, but the logic and the flow of this are inescapable. Look at verse 9. The context here, remember, is that Christians follow Jesus' humility while looking to God to exalt them when and how He chooses. Now, of course, we as Christians should not expect to be super exalted in the same way that Christ is, or at the same level that He is. We do not compare to Jesus and all that He is God. We do not compare to Him as the perfect God-man. But listen, we can still trust this principle that God exalts the humble. Okay, that principle comes from something Jesus said explicitly. He Himself taught it, and Old Testament and New Testament writers also taught this. It's what Jesus modeled for us to follow in this passage. It's what's being alluded to. This connection is what we noted last week in saying that the greatest among you all is your what? Servant, your slave, Matthew 23:11. Well, then the next verse, Matthew 23:12, Jesus says this: whoever exalts himself shall be humbled, and whoever humbles himself shall be exalted. You hear that? That's the principle. That's the principle. That's the truth. That's the reality of Christ's exaltation in Philippians 2. The principle that whoever humbles himself shall be exalted. Matthew 23:12 is where Jesus said it. Whoever exalts himself shall be humbled, and whoever humbles himself shall be exalted. And that brings us to a second lesson from Christ's exaltation that we learned today from verse 9. Point number 2, we learn from the preeminence of Christ's exaltation. We set this in context. We understand this application to us. We learn from the principle of Christ's exaltation. Secondly, we learn from the preeminence of Christ's exaltation. Kids, mom and dad can help you spell that. Preeminence. Preeminence means the highest. It's the best. It is the supreme one, the one who is superior and incomparable and ascended to the top, the most renowned, the one with the greatest prestige and acclaim and authority and honor. It is preeminent, the name of Jesus, the exaltation of Jesus. Literally, verse 9 says, God hyper exalted Him, super exalted Him. Point number 3, learn from the purpose of Christ's exaltation. We've learned from the principle and the preeminence of Christ's exaltation. Thirdly, learn from the purpose of Christ's exaltation. The purpose is that He is recognized for who He is. He is honored as He should be to the glory of the Father. Verse 10 starts with those words, so that, in order that, right? That's the purpose. That's the result. God highly exalted Jesus, gave Him the name above every name. And what is the purpose in that? Well, the purpose is that every knee would bow before Him, that every tongue would confess He is Lord. Next week we'll dive in and discover that that's not teaching any kind of universal salvation. It's teaching universal acknowledgement and submission to Jesus Christ, the sovereign God. We'll consider that final glory of Christ that's returned to the Father in the end. 1 Corinthians 15 talks about, we'll look at that next week. But just today, stop there and know the purpose of Christ's exaltation is for everyone to acknowledge who He is and submit to Him.